I knew something was wrong the moment I touched the shoebox. It wasn't just the unexpected weight of it, or the way it had been wedged behind the water-damaged Christmas decorations in my parents' attic. It was the deliberate care someone had taken to hide it. The box positioned just so, where the rafters cast permanent shadows, where no one would think to look unless they were searching for something specific. Which I wasn't. I was just cleaning out the attic because Mom couldn't climb the ladder anymore, and Gideon was too busy with work, as usual. My fingers trembled as I pulled off the lid. The smell hit me first. Old paper and something else. Something chemical. Money. Stacks of it, bound with faded rubber bands. Hundreds. Thousands. More cash than I'd ever seen outside of movies. Beneath the money lay a letter, the paper yellowed at the edges. I unfolded it, my heart hammering against my ribs. Ella, if you're reading this, you've found what I couldn't bring myself to tell you. The trust fund your grandfather left you, the one that was supposed to pay for your college, your future, was never lost in bad investments. Gideon took it, all of it, with Mom's knowledge. I'm sorry I was too weak to stand up to them. By the time I realized what had happened, Gideon had already used your money to start his business. Mom convinced me it was for the best, that you weren't practical enough to manage that kind of money. This is what I managed to save back for you over the years. It's not everything, but it's something. Dad. The letter slipped from my fingers. The attic suddenly felt airless. The afternoon light through the small window, harsh and accusing. Dad had died 3 years ago, after a silent heart attack. He'd never said a word about this to me. My entire adult life flashed before my eyes. The community college I'd attended while working full-time, because there wasn't money for university. The art school acceptance letter I'd tearfully declined. The tiny apartment I could barely afford, while Gideon lived in his sprawling house on the hill. Ella, you still up there? Mom's voice floated up from below. Gideon and Marissa are here for dinner. I stuffed the letter into my pocket, but left the money. I needed to think. Coming, I called back, my voice surprisingly steady. Downstairs, Gideon was lounging in Dad's old chair, swirling a glass of the expensive scotch he always brought to share. His wife, Marissa, was helping Mom in the kitchen, their voices a gentle murmur of domesticity. There she is, Gideon said, raising his glass. The family saint, cleaning out the attic while some of us have to work. The familiar jab bounced off me. I'd spent 15 years absorbing his condescension. Poor Ella, the directionless younger sister who couldn't get her life together. Poor Ella, who stayed in our hometown to help Mom while he built his real estate empire 2 towns over. Poor stupid Ella, who never questioned why her college fund had mysteriously evaporated. Found anything interesting up there? He asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. Just Christmas decorations and old clothes, I lied, watching his face. Nothing valuable. He nodded, satisfied, and turned to call out to his wife. I studied him, my brother, my betrayer, seeing him clearly for the first time. The carefully maintained salt and pepper at his temples, the tailored shirt that probably cost more than my monthly rent, the signet ring on his right hand that had been a gift to himself when his business took off. My business, my future, my choices. Dinner's ready, Mom announced, carrying in a roast I'd helped her prepare earlier. At 60, she still moved with purpose. Her silver hair swept into the same neat bun she'd worn my entire life. Had she really helped steal my future? Had she really believed I wasn't practical enough to deserve my own inheritance? Ella, would you grab the potatoes? She asked, not meeting my eyes. I went through dinner on autopilot, passing dishes, answering questions about my job at the local library, listening to Gideon boast about his latest development deal. We're finalizing the purchase of that old Wilson property next month, he was saying. Prime location, going to be my biggest project yet. That's wonderful, honey, Mom beamed at him. Your father would have been so proud. Something snapped inside me. Would he? I asked quietly. The table went silent. Gideon's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. I looked at my mother, then back at my brother. Nothing, I said, forcing a smile, just thinking out loud. Later, after they'd gone, I confronted Mom in the kitchen as she washed dishes. I found Dad's box in the attic, I said simply. The plate in her hand slipped, clattering into the sink. She didn't turn around. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. The money, the letter, what you and Gideon did to me. She finally faced me, her expression hardening in a way I'd never seen before. Your brother needed the money to get started. You were just going to waste it on art school. The casual cruelty of her words stole my breath. It was mine. Grandpa left it to me. And look at Gideon now, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. He's built something real, something that matters. With my money, with my future, with my choices. I walked out without another word, the letter burning in my pocket like a brand. By the time I reached my car, I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, my family had stolen more than money from me. And second, I was going to take it all back. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Gideon's smug face across the dinner table, heard Mom's voice. You were just going to waste it on art school, like a knife twisting in my chest. By morning, I'd counted and recounted the money from Dad's box, $43,782, a fraction of what should have been mine. My grandfather had left me over $300,000, a fortune in our small town, enough to change the entire trajectory of my life. I called in sick to the library and drove to Ruby's coffee shop downtown. She'd know what to do. Ruby always knew what to do. The morning rush was over, and she was wiping down tables when I walked in. One look at my face, and she flipped the sign to closed, locked the door, and led me to the back room. Jesus, Ella, you look like hell. She pushed me into a chair and started making tea. What happened? I told her everything. The box, the letter, the confrontation with Mom. Ruby listened without interrupting, her expression darkening with each detail. Those absolute bastards, she said when I finished. I always thought Gideon was a pompous ass. But this is criminal. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice cracking. I feel so stupid. All these years, watching him succeed with my money while I struggled. Ruby set 2 mugs of tea on the table and sat across from me. You're not stupid. You trusted your family. That's what you're supposed to do. Fat lot of good that did me. So what now? Are you going to confront Gideon? I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. He'll just deny it. Or worse, he'll admit it and tell me it was the right thing to do, just like Mom did. You could sue them, Ruby suggested. That letter from your dad is evidence. And drag our family drama through the courts, in this town. I shook my head. Everyone would know, and Mom would never forgive me. Forgive you? Ruby's voice rose. Ella, she helped steal your inheritance. Why are you worried about her forgiving you? I had no answer for that. 15 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. Ruby's expression softened. Look, I get it. They're still your family, but you deserve justice. And you deserve to stop putting everyone else first, for once in your life. She was right. I'd spent my entire adult life being the responsible one, the one who stayed behind, the one who sacrificed. And for what? To be the family doormat. I want my money back, I said finally, and I want them to acknowledge what they did to me. Then you need leverage, Ruby said, her eyes gleaming with sudden intensity. Something Gideon wants badly enough that he'll pay to get it. Like what? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. She squeezed my hand. You're not alone in this, okay? After leaving Ruby's, I drove past Mom's house, slowing as I approached. The familiar 2-story colonial, with its peeling white paint and sagging porch, had never looked so foreign to me. How many weekends had I spent fixing things around that house, while Gideon was too busy? How many of my own dreams had I put on hold to be the dutiful daughter? I kept driving. Without conscious decision, I found myself turning onto Oak Ridge Drive, where Gideon's office sat in a renovated Victorian near the town square. Davis Real Estate Development. My name on his building, my money in his pocket. I parked across the street and watched people come and go. Gideon's assistant, a harried-looking woman with a Bluetooth headset, a couple of contractors with rolled-up blueprints, a woman in an expensive-looking pantsuit who looked vaguely familiar. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruby. Town council minutes from last month. Check out item 7. I pulled up the document, scanning until I found item 7. Proposed rezoning for Wilson Property Development. G. Davis presenting. The Wilson property, the one Gideon had mentioned at dinner, his biggest project yet. I kept reading, and something cold settled in my stomach. The council was split on approving the rezoning. The vote had been tabled until next month's meeting, pending community input and resolution of concerns about historical preservation. Another text from Ruby. The woman fighting him on this is Saiji Holmes. She wants to preserve the property as a historical site. I remembered where I'd seen the pantsuit woman now. Her picture had been in the local paper last month. Sage Holmes, local business owner and preservationist. As if summoned by my thoughts, Sage emerged from Gideon's office, her face tight with anger. She stalked to her car, slammed the door, and peeled out of the parking lot. Not a productive meeting then. My phone buzzed again. Ruby, one more thing, your mom's house. It's the last property Gideon needs to complete the block for phase 2 of his development. He's been trying to convince her to sell for months. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Mom's house. The house I'd helped maintain for years. The house that, according to Dad's will, would eventually pass to both Gideon and me. I started my car, a plan forming. If Gideon wanted that house so badly, maybe it was time to show him exactly how impractical I could be. First, though, I needed to talk to Saiji Holmes. Tracking down Saiji Holmes was easier than I expected. Her business, a high-end furniture restoration shop, occupied a corner storefront downtown, its windows filled with gleaming antiques that made my librarian's salary ache just looking at them. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door. The shop smelled of lemon oil and old wood, a comforting scent that reminded me of helping Dad refinish furniture in our garage. Before I could call out, Sage emerged from a back room, still wearing the pantsuit I'd seen her in outside Gideon's office. "We're closing in 15 minutes, she said, her tone clipped. Then she looked at me properly, and something shifted in her expression. "You're Ella Davis." I blinked, caught off guard. "How did you look like your brother." She said it like an accusation. "If he sent you to try to change my mind about the Wilson property, you're wasting your time." "I'm not here for Gideon," I said quickly. "Actually, I'm here because I think we might have common interests." Saiji crossed her arms, skepticism written across her face. "I'm listening." "Not here," I said, glancing at the large windows facing the street. In a town this size, word traveled fast. "Could we talk somewhere private?" 20 minutes later, we sat in a corner booth at Mabel's Diner on the edge of town, coffee mugs steaming between us. I'd given her the condensed version of my situation, the stolen inheritance, the letter from Dad, Gideon's development plans. "So you want revenge," Saiji said, stirring cream into her coffee. "I want justice," I corrected, though the distinction felt paper-thin. "And I want to stop my brother from bulldozing half the town's history for luxury condos." "Those aren't necessarily the same goal." "They could be." I leaned forward. "The Wilson property is Gideon's priority right now, but he's also after my mother's house for phase 2 of his development. A house that, according to my father's will, I half own when she passes." Saiji's eyes narrowed with interest. "And you're willing to use that against him?" "I'm willing to explore my options," I said carefully. "What exactly is your stake in all this?" Something flickered across her face. Hesitation, maybe, or calculation. The Wilson house was designed by my great-grandfather. It's one of the last examples of his work still standing. I've been trying to get it designated as a historical landmark, but your brother's development plans are complicating things. "And that's the only reason you care?" I pressed, sensing there was more. Saiki took a long sip of her coffee. "Let's just say your brother and I have history, and I'd rather not see him succeed in erasing mine." Before I could ask what she meant, the diner door swung open, and Vincenzo Chavez walked in. My stomach did a little flip. I'd had a crush on him since high school, when he was the quiet, intense boy who sketched buildings during lunch. Now he was a successful architect who'd moved back to town last year after working in Chicago. He spotted me and smiled, changing course to approach our table. "Ella," he said warmly, "I haven't seen you since the library fundraiser." "Hi, Vince," I managed, suddenly aware of my unwashed hair and the dark circles under my eyes. "You know Sage, right?" "Of course." His smile cooled slightly as he nodded to her. "How's the preservation campaign going?" "It would be going better if your client wasn't trying to destroy a piece of architectural history," Saijay replied, her tone pleasant but pointed. I looked between them, confused. "You're working with Gideon." Vince had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm designing the residential complex for the Wilson property. It's a big opportunity." "For some of us," Saig muttered. An awkward silence fell. I felt a strange sense of betrayal, which was ridiculous. Vince didn't owe me anything. We weren't even friends, really. Just familiar faces in a small town. "I should get going," he said finally. "It was good seeing you, Ella. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime." "Sure," I said automatically, though my mind was already racing ahead. Vince was working with Gideon. Vince had access to Gideon's plans, his timelines, maybe even his financial arrangements. After he left, Saijay raised an eyebrow. "Interesting." "What?" "The way he looked at you, and the way you're looking at the door he just walked through." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "It's not like that." "It could be," she said, a calculating gleam in her eye. "He might be useful." "I'm not going to use Vince," I said firmly, though the idea had already taken root. "That's something Gideon would do." Saiji shrugged. "Your brother uses people because it's easy for him. You'd be doing it for justice." "There's a difference." Was there? The line seemed increasingly blurry. "Look," Saiji said, pushing her empty mug aside. "I have contacts at the Historical Society and on the town council. You have insider knowledge about your brother's plans and leverage with your mother's property. We could help each other." "What exactly are you proposing?" "A partnership. We pool our resources to block your brother's development. I get to preserve the Wilson house, and you get what's rightfully mine," I finished. Saiji extended her hand across the table. "Do we have a deal?" I hesitated, thinking about what Ruby would say, about what Dad would think of me conspiring against my own family, about the years I'd spent being the good daughter while Gideon took everything I should have had. I shook her hand. "We have a deal." As I drove home, a text from Ruby lit up my phone. "Found something interesting in the county records. Call me ASAP." The game was changing, and for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't just a pawn on someone else's board. Ruby's discovery hit me like a physical blow. "It's all there in the property records," she said, spreading papers across her kitchen table. "Your mom transferred full ownership of the house to Gideon 3 months ago." I stared at the document, my mother's familiar signature at the bottom. "That's not possible. Dad's will specified that the house would go to both of us when she—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "When she dies, yeah. But there's nothing stopping her from giving it away while she's alive." Ruby's voice softened. "I'm sorry, Ella." The betrayal felt fresh, raw, not just the house itself, but what it represented. Another piece of my future, my security, handed to Gideon without a second thought. "Did she get anything for it?" I asked, my voice hollow. Ruby flipped through the papers. "The transfer shows $1 as the sale price." $1, I laughed, the sound brittle, even to my own ears. 15 years of me fixing that house, painting rooms, mowing the lawn, and she sells it to him for $1. Maybe she doesn't know what he's planning to do with it. I shook my head. "She knows. She always knows what Gideon's up to. She just doesn't care." Ruby squeezed my shoulder. "So what now?" "This changes things with Sage's plan." "Not necessarily." I straightened the papers, my mind racing. Mom still lives in the house. Gideon can't demolish it with her in it, and she won't move until she's ready. You think you can convince your mom to hold out? No, I said slowly, an idea taking shape. But I might be able to convince her that Gideon isn't the golden child she thinks he is. The next morning, I called Vince. My heart hammered as the phone rang. Part nervousness about my plan, part something else I wasn't ready to examine. Ella, he sounded surprised. I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. About that coffee, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Are you free today? We met at a cafe 2 towns over, where there was less chance of running into anyone who knew us. I'd spent an hour getting ready, telling myself it was just to appear professional, not because of the way Vince's eyes had lingered on mine at the diner. He was already there when I arrived, sketching on a napkin. He stood when he saw me, his smile genuine. I was starting to think you were avoiding me, he said as we sat. Why would I avoid you? Because I'm working with your brother, and because of what happened at the fundraiser. My cheeks warmed at the memory. We'd both had too much wine, ended up talking for hours in a quiet corner. There'd been a moment, his hand on mine, his eyes asking a question I wasn't ready to answer. I'd made an excuse and left. That was months ago, I said. Ancient history, is it? His gaze was steady, searching. I looked away first. I actually wanted to talk to you about Gideon's project. His expression closed slightly. Ella, I can't share confidential information about a client. I'm not asking you to. I just want to understand what he's planning. I leaned forward. The Wilson property is important to a lot of people in town, including me. Why you? You don't live anywhere near there. This was the moment, the first real test of how far I was willing to go. My mother's house is part of phase 2, I said. Gideon's planning to tear it down eventually. Vince frowned. That can't be right. He specifically told me that property was off limits because it belonged to your mother. Check the property records, I said quietly. He owns it now. I watched the realization dawn on his face. He lied to me. He lies to everyone. I took a deep breath. Vince, there's something else you should know. About Gideon, about my family. I told him everything. The trust fund, Dad's letter, the years of deception. With each word, I felt lighter, as if sharing the burden somehow lessened it. When I finished, Vince was silent for a long moment. I'm so sorry that happened to you, he finally said. But I don't understand what you want from me. Information, I admitted. Anything that might help me understand what Gideon's really planning. Not just for the Wilson property, but for the whole area. You're asking me to betray a client's trust. I'm asking you to help me stop someone who's built his entire career on stolen money. My money. Vince ran a hand through his hair, conflict evident in his expression. Even if what you're saying is true, I can't just hand over confidential plans. Then don't. I reached across the table, my fingers stopping just short of his. But if you happen to notice anything that doesn't add up, anything that seems off, I'd appreciate knowing about it. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, I saw the same question there I'd seen at the fundraiser. This time, I didn't look away. I need to think about this, he said finally. Of course, I stood to leave, then paused. Thank you for listening, at least. He caught my hand as I turned. Ella, be careful. Your brother isn't someone you want as an enemy. Too late, I said. He made me his enemy 15 years ago. He just didn't know it yet. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Sage. Meeting tonight, 8 p.m. I found something you need to see. Whatever she'd discovered, I was ready. The conversation with Vince had solidified something in me. A determination that went beyond anger or revenge. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about finally standing up for myself, about refusing to be the family doormat one day longer, even if it meant becoming someone I never thought I could be. Say's something turned out to be someone. A thin, nervous man named Patrick, who'd worked as Gideon's accountant for the past decade. Tell her what you told me, Sage said, after introducing us in the back room of her shop. Patrick glanced at the door, as if expecting Gideon to burst through it. I shouldn't be here. If he finds out, he won't, Sage assured him. But Ella deserves to know the truth. Patrick turned to me, his eyes unable to meet mine for more than a second. Your brother's business is built on more than just your trust fund. There's a pattern of financial irregularities. What kind of irregularities? I asked. Investors who don't exist, properties purchased through shell companies, money moving between accounts in ways that don't make sense. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. It's all in here. Bank statements, property transfers, tax documents. I stared at the small device. Why are you giving me this? Because I'm done being part of it. His voice strengthened slightly. Last month, he asked me to falsify documents for the Wilson property development, to hide the fact that he doesn't have the financing he claims to have. The bank wouldn't approve his loan, Saja added. He's been stringing along the town council, promising jobs and tax revenue he can't deliver. I took the flash drive, turning it over in my palm. This could ruin him. Yes, Patrick said simply. Why now? You've worked for him for years. Patrick finally met my gaze. Because he mentioned your mother's house, said it was the final piece he needed. When I asked if you'd agreed to the development plan, he laughed and said, Ella will do what she's told. She always does. The words hit like a slap. Is that really how Gideon saw me? As someone who would just roll over and do what she was told? Thank you, I said to Patrick. This can't have been easy. After he left, Seiji poured us each a glass of whiskey. So, what's our next move? I slipped the flash drive into my pocket. I need to look through this first. Understand exactly what we're dealing with. And then? Then I talked to my mother. The next day, I drove to Mom's house, the flash drive burning a hole in my pocket. I'd spent half the night going through Patrick's files, my stomach knotting tighter with each document. The evidence was damning. Gideon hadn't just stolen my trust fund. He'd built a house of cards on top of it, one shady deal after another. Mom answered the door in her gardening clothes, dirt smudging her knees. For a moment, she looked so normal, so much like the mother I'd always loved, that my resolve wavered. Ella, I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk. I stepped past her into the house. About Gideon. About what he's really doing with your house. Her expression hardened. If this is about that nonsense you found in the attic, this isn't about my trust fund. Not entirely. I moved to the living room, where family photos lined the mantel. Gideon in his cap and gown. Gideon breaking ground on his first development. Gideon. Did you know he's planning to tear this house down? She followed me, arms crossed. That's ridiculous. Is it? Then why did you sign over ownership to him? A flicker of something, guilt, uncertainty, crossed her face. He explained that it was for tax purposes, so I wouldn't have to pay property taxes anymore. And you believed him? Mom, he's planning to demolish this house as part of his Wilson property development. It's all in the plans. He wouldn't do that. Not without telling me. Like he told me about my trust fund. The words came out sharper than I intended. Mom's face flushed. That was different. We were trying to protect you. Protect me from what? Having options? Being able to make my own choices? I pulled out my phone, showing her the development plans Seiji had sent me. Look, Phase 2, right here. Existing structures to be demolished. That's this house, Mom. She took the phone, her hands trembling slightly as she studied the screen. There must be some mistake. It's not a mistake, it's who Gideon is. He takes what he wants and doesn't care who gets hurt. I took a deep breath. And you've been helping him do it. That's not fair, isn't it? You helped him steal my future. Now he's stealing yours, and you're still making excuses for him. Mom sank onto the couch, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. What do you want from me, Ella? I want you to see him for who he really is. I want you to help me stop him before he destroys half the town. I sat beside her, softening my tone. And I want my mother back, the one who used to tell me I could be anything I wanted to be. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if I can stand against Gideon. You don't have to. Just don't stand with him. I covered her hand with mine. Let me handle the rest. Before she could answer, the front door opened. Gideon's voice called out, "Mom? Your car's in the shop, right? I thought I'd take you grocery shopping." He appeared in the doorway, freezing when he saw me. His eyes darted between us, taking in Mom's distressed expression, my hand on hers. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Just visiting Mom," I said, standing. We were having a nice chat about the future of this house. Something cold and calculating entered his expression. "Were you, Gideon?" Mom said, her voice unsteady. "Is it true? About the development plans?" His face hardened. "Ella has no idea what she's talking about." "I think I do." I moved toward the door, pausing as I passed him. "By the way, Patrick says hello." The color drained from Gideon's face. "What did he tell you?" "Enough." I smiled, a sharp, unfamiliar expression that felt like someone else's face on mine. "We'll talk soon, brother. I have a feeling we have a lot to discuss." As I walked to my car, Gideon followed, grabbing my arm once we were out of Mom's sight. "You're playing a dangerous game," he hissed. I pulled free of his grip. I learned from the best. For the first time in my life, I saw something new in my brother's eyes as he looked at me. Fear. "He's suing you for defamation." Ruby slid the legal document across her kitchen table. "Cease and desist, damages, the works." I scanned the dense legal text, my hands shaking slightly. It had been 3 days since my confrontation with Gideon at Mom's house. 3 days of unanswered calls from her. 3 days of feeling like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. "This is just intimidation," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "He's trying to scare me into backing down." "Well, it's working on me," Ruby admitted. "Ella, he's got serious lawyers. This could get ugly." "It's already ugly." I pushed the papers away. "But I'm not stopping now." Ruby studied my face. "You've changed, you know that. A month ago you would have apologized and backed down the second Gideon raised his voice. Had I changed that much? The woman I'd been before, finding Dad's box, felt like a stranger now, someone who bent over backward to keep the peace, who swallowed her own needs to meet everyone else's expectations. "Maybe I needed to change," I said quietly. My phone buzzed with a text from Vince. "Need to talk. Meet me at the old boathouse, 7 p.m. The boathouse sat on the edge of the lake, where we'd all spent summers as teenagers. It had been abandoned for years, but it was private. Exactly what I needed right now. Vince was waiting when I arrived, pacing along the weathered dock. The setting sun cast long shadows across the water, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Thanks for coming," he said, his expression grave. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because your brother paid me a visit today." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of stress. "He knows we've been talking. Said you're having some kind of breakdown, making wild accusations." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "And you believed him?" "I didn't say that." Vince leaned against the railing. "But he did show me something interesting. A psychological evaluation from when you were in college. Said you had a history of emotional problems." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. That evaluation had been confidential. A mandatory session after I'd had a panic attack during finals week, my sophomore year. Nothing serious, just stress and exhaustion. But Gideon had somehow gotten hold of it and was using it against me. "That's private medical information," I said, my voice tight, "and it has nothing to do with what's happening now." "I know." Vince moved closer, his eyes searching mine. "That's why I'm here, because using something like that against his own sister tells me everything I need to know about Gideon's character." Relief washed over me. "So you believe me?" "I believe that you believe what you're saying." He hesitated. "And I found something in the development plans that doesn't add up." He pulled out his phone, showing me a set of architectural drawings. "See this section here? It's labeled as green space in the public plans, but in the internal documents, it's marked for future development. A high-rise apartment complex that would completely change the town's skyline." "He's lying to the town council," I murmured. "It gets worse. The environmental impact study he submitted It's for a different property entirely. He just changed the header. I stared at Vince, a new understanding dawning. You're risking your career showing me this. Maybe. He put his phone away. Or maybe I'm just doing what's right. On impulse, I reached for his hand. Thank you. His fingers tightened around mine. For a moment, we stood in silence, the gentle lapping of water against the dock the only sound. Ella, he said finally, whatever you're planning to do with this information, be careful. Gideon isn't just going to back down. I know. I stepped closer, drawn to his warmth, his steadiness, but neither am I. The moment stretched between us, full of unspoken possibilities. Then his phone rang, shattering the silence. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It's Sage, he said, answering. Hello. Slow down. I can't. What? When? The look on his face sent ice through my veins. What is it? I asked as he hung up. There was a fire at Sage's shop. It's destroyed, and Patrick is in the hospital. What happened? Sage thinks it wasn't an accident. She says Patrick called her right before, saying someone had broken into his apartment, looking for something. The flash drive. The evidence against Gideon. We need to go, I said, already moving toward my car. Now. At the hospital, we found Sagi in the waiting room. Her clothes smelling of smoke, her face streaked with soot. Smoke inhalation, she said before I could ask. They're keeping him overnight for observation. He was at my shop when it happened, helping me go through more of Gideon's files. The flash drive, I began, is safe. She patted her pocket. But everything else is gone. All my research, all the physical documents. This is my fault, I whispered. I confronted Gideon, told him about Patrick. This isn't your fault, Vince said firmly. This is Gideon showing his true colors. Sage's eyes narrowed as she looked between us. You two seem closer. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Mom's number. Ella. Her voice was tight with anxiety. You need to come home, right now. Mom, what's wrong? It's Gideon. He's here with some men. They're measuring the house, talking about demolition schedules. He says I have 30 days to move out. That's not legal, I said, anger rising. He can't just evict you. He says he can. He has papers. Her voice broke. Ella, I'm scared. I'm on my way. I hung up, turning to Vince and Sage. Gideon's at Mom's house. He's trying to force her out. Go, Sage said. I'll stay with Patrick. Vince grabbed his keys. I'm coming with you. As we raced to Mom's house, a cold clarity settled over me. Gideon wasn't just fighting to protect his business anymore. He was lashing out, hurting people I cared about, trying to destroy any evidence of his crimes. This had to end. Tonight. And I was done playing by his rules. Mom's house blazed with light when we pulled up, every window illuminated as if on display. 2 unfamiliar SUVs sat in the driveway beside Gideon's sleek black Mercedes. Stay in the car, I told Vince, reaching for the door handle. He caught my wrist. Ella, wait. What's your plan here? I don't know, I admitted. But I need to protect my mother. Then let me come with you. I shook my head. Gideon will just use you against me somehow. I need to do this alone. The front door opened before I reached it. Mom stood there, her face pale, her hands twisting the dish towel she held. He's in the living room, she whispered, with his lawyer and some contractor. I squeezed her shoulder as I passed. It's going to be okay. The living room had been transformed into an impromptu office. Blueprints covered the coffee table, and a man in a suit I didn't recognize was typing on a laptop. A second man, wearing a hard hat and carrying a tablet, was measuring the archway between the living room and dining room. And there was Gideon, lounging in Dad's old armchair like he owned the place, which technically he did. Ah, the cavalry arrives, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Though I'm not sure what you think you can do, Ella. You can start by telling your goons to stop measuring Mom's house. I stepped into the center of the room, forcing the contractor to step back. She's not going anywhere. Actually, she is. Gideon nodded to the suit, who produced a document. Notice to vacate. 30 days. All perfectly legal. Nothing about this is legal, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Not the way you got this house, not what you're planning to do with it, and certainly not the way you've been conducting your business. Something dangerous flickered in Gideon's eyes. I'd be very careful about what accusations you throw around. Or what? You'll sue me? Start a fire? Send someone to break into an accountant's apartment? I stepped closer. I know what you did, Gideon. I have proof. You have nothing, he snapped, standing. And even if you did, who would believe you? The unstable little sister who couldn't handle college, who's been jealous of my success for years. Gideon, please, Mom said from the doorway. This is your sister. Stay out of this, Mom, he said, not taking his eyes off me. No, her voice strengthened. I won't stay out of it. Not anymore. We both turned to look at her, surprised by the steel in her tone. This is my house, she continued. Your father and I bought it together. We raised you here, and I didn't give it to you so you could tear it down. You signed the papers, Gideon said dismissively. Because you lied to me. Mom moved to stand beside me. Just like you lied about Ella's trust fund. Gideon's face darkened. We agreed that was for the best. No, you decided it was for the best, and I was too weak to stand up to you. She looked at me, regret etched in the lines around her eyes. I'm sorry, Ella. I should have protected you. The simple apology, 15 years too late, loosened something in my chest. It's okay, Mom. This is very touching, Gideon interrupted. But it changes nothing. I own this house. The development is moving forward. Without financing? I asked. Without proper environmental studies, without the town council's approval for your actual plans, not the sanitized version you showed them? The suit looked up sharply. Mr. Davis, what is she talking about? Gideon's mask slipped for a moment, raw fury showing through. She's bluffing. I pulled out my phone, holding it up. The flash drive with all of Patrick's files. I made copies, sent them to my email, to Ruby, to Sage. Even if you destroy this phone, the evidence is already out there. Evidence of what? The suit asked, looking between us. Fraud, I said simply. Tax evasion, falsified documents, using shell companies to hide assets. Should I go on? The contractor had stopped measuring, watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. Get out, Gideon told them, his voice tight. Both of you, now. They gathered their things quickly, the suit pausing only to say, we should talk tomorrow, Gideon. Before they hurried out, when the front door closed behind them, Gideon rounded on me. You have no idea what you've done. I know exactly what I've done, I said. I've stopped you from destroying this town for your own profit, from bullying Mom out of her home, from getting away with stealing my future. Your future, he scoffed. What future? Art school. A life of poverty and obscurity. I built something real with that money. You built a house of cards, I corrected. And now it's falling down. He moved suddenly, grabbing my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. Give me the phone, now. Let her go, Mom cried, trying to pull him off me. He shoved her away, sending her stumbling back against the wall. The sound of her head hitting the plaster echoed in the room. Something snapped inside me. I wrenched free of his grip and shoved him hard, both hands against his chest. He staggered backward, surprise replacing anger on his face. Don't you ever touch her again, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Don't you ever touch either of us again. The front door burst open, and Vince rushed in, followed by 2 police officers. Is everyone okay? One officer asked, taking in the scene. We got a call about a disturbance. Everything's fine, Gideon said smoothly, straightening his jacket. Just a family disagreement. He assaulted my mother, I said, helping Mom to a chair. And he's been threatening me. That's ridiculous, Gideon protested. Officer, my sister is emotionally unstable. She's making wild accusations. Actually, Vince interrupted, holding up his phone. I recorded everything from outside, the threats, the assault, all of it. Gideon's face went blank with shock. You can't. We'd like to file charges, I told the officers. And I have evidence of financial crimes I'd like to submit as well. As one officer began taking Mom's statement, the other approached Gideon. Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me. This isn't over, Gideon hissed, as the officer led him toward the door. You think you've won? You've got nothing without me. You've always been nothing. I watched him go, a strange calm settling over me. You're wrong, I said, though he was already out of earshot. I'm just getting started. When the police car pulled away, Vince came to stand beside me on the porch. You okay? I looked back at the house, where Mom sat with the remaining officer, at the garden Dad had planted, at the porch swing where I'd spent countless summer evenings dreaming of a different life. No, I said honestly. But I will be. For the first time in 15 years, I believed it. The Wilson house stood before me, morning sunlight glinting off its freshly restored windows. The wraparound porch had been rebuilt using the original blueprints, the gingerbread trim repainted in historically accurate colors. Even the garden had been replanted with heritage varieties that might have grown there a century ago. What do you think? Saji asked, coming to stand beside me. Worth the fight? Absolutely. I ran my hand along the porch railing, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingers. Your great-grandfather would be proud. The last 6 weeks had been a whirlwind. Gideon's arrest had triggered investigations into his business dealings, exposing a web of fraud that stretched back years. His assets had been frozen, his projects halted, his reputation in tatters. The Historical Society wants to host the grand opening next month, Saj said. They're hoping you'll say a few words. Me? Why? Because without you, this place would be a hole in the ground, with luxury condos rising from it. She bumped my shoulder with hers. You're the hero of this story, whether you like it or not. Hero wasn't a word I'd ever associated with myself. Doormat, yes. Victim, sometimes. But hero? I just did what needed to be done, I said. That's pretty much the definition of heroism. Saiji checked her watch. I should get back to the shop. The insurance finally came through, so renovation starts today. After she left, I wandered through the Wilson house, admiring the craftsmanship, the attention to detail. The town council had approved its designation as a historical landmark and community center, a place where people could gather, where local history would be preserved. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruby. Court date set for next week. You ready? I typed back, as ready as I'll ever be. The district attorney had been building a case against Gideon, and I would be testifying. The thought of facing my brother across a courtroom still made my stomach clench, but I wouldn't back down. Not anymore. Another text came through, this one from Mom. Lunch today. Our relationship was still fragile, a delicate reconstruction of trust. She'd moved in with her sister temporarily while we sorted out the house situation. The ownership transfer to Gideon had been invalidated due to his fraudulent representations, but the legal details were still being untangled. I was about to reply when I heard footsteps on the porch. Vince appeared in the doorway, a cardboard tube under his arm. I thought I might find you here, he said, smiling. Just admiring the restoration. I gestured around the room. It's amazing what Seiji accomplished in such a short time. She had good help. He stepped closer. I have something for you. He unrolled the contents of the tube, architectural drawings, but not of the Wilson house, of a small studio space, filled with light, with built-in storage, for canvases and supplies. What is this? I asked, though I already knew. Your art studio. He pointed to details on the plans. It would be an addition to your mother's house. I've already checked the zoning, and it's all within code. I stared at the drawings, emotion tightening my throat. Vince, I can't. Yes, you can. His eyes held mine. The settlement from Gideon's assets will more than cover it. And before you say it's too much, remember, this is your money. The money that should have been yours all along. The settlement. The court had ruled that Gideon would have to repay my trust fund with interest. It wouldn't undo the years I'd lost, the choices I hadn't been able to make, but it was something. A chance to start over. I haven't painted in years, I said softly. Maybe it's time to start again. I traced the outline of the studio on the plans, allowing myself to imagine it, a space of my own, filled with color and possibility. Thank you, I said, not just for this, for everything. He took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. You did the hard part yourself. Not entirely. I looked up at him. I had help. The moment stretched between us, full of unspoken words. Then he leaned down and kissed me, gentle at first, then with growing certainty. I kissed him back, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not just desire, but possibility. A future opening up before me, full of choices that were finally, truly mine. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that since the library fundraiser. What took you so long? I teased. I was waiting for you to be ready. And I was. Ready for this. Ready for whatever came next. My phone buzzed again. A reminder about a meeting with the lawyer handling my settlement. The real world. Intruding. I should go, I said reluctantly. I have a meeting downtown. Dinner tonight? Vince asked. I know a place with a great view of the lake. I'd like that. As I drove to my meeting, I passed the construction site where Gideon's development should have been. Instead of luxury condos, a sign announced the future home of affordable housing and a community garden. The town council had repurposed the land after seizing it in the fraud investigation. I smiled at the irony. Gideon had wanted to build a monument to himself, to his success. Instead, he'd created the opportunity for something that would actually benefit the community. At a stoplight, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked different somehow, more confident, more present. The woman who had discovered that box in the attic felt like a stranger now, someone I'd outgrown. The light turned green, and I drove on. Ahead lay the meeting, then dinner with Vince, then the court date, then the studio construction. A series of moments, each one a choice, each one mine to make. I'd spent 15 years living in the shadow of what had been taken from me. Now I was stepping into the light of what I could build for myself. It wasn't the life I'd once imagined. It was better. Because this one I'd chosen.